Hello friends, welcome to a reading video that I am so excited about. If you've been following for a little while, you might know that I have a TBR, physical TBR of around 25 books, and I've been trying to get it down. Ideally, I would love to have no books on my physical TBR, or at least like no more than 5, because it's really overwhelming to have a giant stack of unread books that you're constantly trying to get through and you can never really feel caught up with. And I thought today it would be kind of fun to make some progress going through that, but not just any old reading vlog. We're gonna be doing a 24-hour reading challenge. And on top of that, I would like to mostly focus on newer releases because I have been trying really hard to not buy so many books, to try and get through the ones that I have, which a lot of them have been sitting on the shelf for years, so I don't really feel like I'm in on the hype of new books, new releases like that, which I think is fine, and I think that's a big reason why I'm trying not to have so many books on my physical TBR, is because I want to read things when they're interesting, when they're being talked about, rather than buying them all just to have them, but then I never actually get to experience it, you know what I mean? But I will admit, there have been a couple of times this year that I've caved, that I've bought some newer releases, because I just have to see what it's all about. And what better time to get through them than a 24-hour reading challenge where we can just sit down, we can make really good progress, move through a lot of them really quickly, and hopefully have a great time, because I've heard a lot of good things about these books and they seem to be very popular right now. And if they're popular with everybody else, maybe they'll just keep me going and I'll fly through them and we'll get through a lot of books during this time. I don't know, that's at least my hope with this video. There are just so many books that I am excited to read that no, they haven't been the ones that are sitting on my TBR, but if I'm so excited to read them, let's just take advantage of that feeling while we have it. I'm not gonna have a definite list of what I want to get through in these 24 hours, but the ones that I'm most excited for, I have my 2 most recent book of the months. This one is Care and Feeding, which is a memoir, and I don't know anything about it, I haven't heard anything about it, but I generally tend to enjoy memoirs, and it's been a while since I've gotten into nonfiction, so I do think it would be fine to get into this. I don't have a burning desire to start it, but I do think it will be interesting once I start it. I don't feel super intimidated by the idea of it being nonfiction, which is generally a good sign. And then The Wedding People came out, I think, last year, but recently I've heard a lot of good things about it. I've heard a lot of people talking about it. I don't really know anything about it. It was a finalist for Book of the Year, like Book of the Month's voting that they do at the end of the year. So it has a lot of good reviews, a lot of good conversation around it. All I know is it's this lady that is at a wedding that she's not supposed to be at or something, but that's literally all I know about it. So this is another one that I got more recently that I'm pretty interested in. And then the real thing that's sparking this idea for this video is I went to the bookstore yesterday and I told myself I don't need to get more books. I have all these things on my TBR that I have to get through, and I told myself I'm not gonna buy any more. And then as we were walking in, they had an advertisement for John Green's newest book in the window, and I said, okay, well, if I see that one, then I'll get it, because I haven't seen it out physically yet. So I was like, okay, if I see it, I might as well take advantage of that and get it. I browsed the bookstore, I don't see it. I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of disappointing, but let me just get one thing, because there are a lot of books that I've been wanting to get, and this isn't a bookstore I normally go to, so let me just kind of make a moment out of it and get one thing to remember this trip by. And that book was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, which is not really a new release. I think it came out like 2 years ago at this point, but I was waiting for it to come out paperback. I've definitely heard mixed reviews about it. I've heard some people say that it's really insightful and that it's really smart how it was done, but then I've seen other people say that it kind of missed the mark. I'm definitely curious to see what I'll think on that. But anyways, we go to the checkout, we buy that book, and then as we're walking out of the bookstore, we pass a table with John Green's book. His newest book, Everything is Tuberculosis. I've heard him talk about it, and that's it. I haven't seen anybody else talking about it, anybody else reading it, but I will read anything that this man puts out, okay? So when I saw this at the table, it really took a lot of willpower to walk past it, be like, okay, I already got a book today, I don't need it. And then I passed a table for Sunrise on the Reaping, the new Hunger Games book. And the thing about this one is it's been sold out at the Barnes & Noble by my house ever since it came out. I haven't seen this book physically at all. The only people I know that have actually read it are people that pre-ordered it way in advance, and I just didn't do that, so I hadn't had the chance to see or read this book. But they had one left on this display table, and I couldn't not. And at that point I was like, okay, well, what's I already have to go back to the register, so we might as well just make a whole thing out of it. So I bought both, which means now I have 3 books that I have been looking forward to for the longest time, and I am so excited to read all of them. And I want to do nothing more than sit down and make progress and get through them. I want to have so many thoughts on these books, so I have to read them first, right? And that's what this video is for. Because if I'm making a 24-hour reading vlog, then I have an excuse to sit and read for 24 hours. And I'm not gonna do the whole 24 hours straight, because I actually care for myself sometimes. We're gonna do this 24 hours total. So I'll read a couple hours tonight, I'll read some more hours tomorrow. We'll just see over the next couple of days how many of these books I can get through over a span of 24 hours total. No all-nighter here, unless one of these books is so captivating that I just cannot put it down. Which is my hope, because it has been so long since I've genuinely been excited to pick up a book. Trying to get through this TBR sometimes feels like such a challenge and such a chore, so the idea that I have books that I am currently actively wanting to pick up and that are actually relevant in people's conversations right now, rather than reading books that had been trending years ago, I'm just so excited for the potential, because these could be new favorites, and they could also be nothing, and they could just be kind of meh books, but I really don't think that's gonna be the case. So come with me as we do some reading, and we just have a great time, okay? We're gonna have the best time. I am so excited. I could sit here and try to make a whole big deal over deciding which book I'm gonna pick first, which one is the most exciting to me right this very moment, but I don't think we need that at all. I think we can all guess which one it's gonna be, because Sunrise on the Reaping just came out. It came out March 18th, so not even a month ago. I read all the Hunger Games books way back in my youth and my school years, and then I read the Songbirds and Snakes book when it came out. I went to the theater and I watched the movie, which is saying a lot, because I am not one to go to the theaters. But I did for that, and I couldn't not, you know? It's one of those series that is just kind of always there. When Suzanne Collins calls, I answer, okay? I made a whole video talking about that book and that movie, and I had so much fun doing it because this world is so intricately built, and it's so interesting to read about, and it's also so exciting to see how many people get so passionate about it, especially when you consider how it compares to the real world. This book is so exciting. In Sunrise on the Reaping, you are following the 50th games. The 50th Hunger Games, which is Haymitch's games. If you know how long people have been waiting for his story, I am so excited to read this book. I'm gonna keep it spoiler-free in this video just because it is still a pretty new release, and I know a lot of people are probably still very excited to start it. I don't want to come in here and just throw all my thoughts out, so we're gonna keep this spoiler-free. I'll keep it vague, but genuinely, I think I'm gonna get through this so quickly because it's so captivating, you know? Every time you're introduced to this world or to the games, even though you would feel like it would get repetitive because you're following the same style of games for however many years, but somehow every single time there are new things to be interested in. I don't know. I have heard nothing but good things about this book. I was kind of worried that it's gonna be underwhelming just because of how much people were looking forward to it, but from everything I've seen from people in person and online, it is a really good book. So we're starting with this. As always, we strip it bare. First book of the 24 hours of reading. Oh, I'm so excited. Let the 24 hours begin. It's 8:30 p.m. right now. I've been reading for like half an hour, which I know isn't that long, but oh my gosh. I cannot explain how good these books are. Because the thing is, in the first Hunger Games books, in the actual series, you're following the 75th and on. But then in Songbirds and Snakes, you go all the way back to the beginning when Snow was first becoming president. You're going like 50 years back. And then in this one, you're going to the 50th games. And it is so interesting to see how everything ties together because you already know everything that happens with Katniss, everything that happens in the future, like in the farthest future that we know at least. And then you go back and you see President Snow and you see why he acts the way that he acts and the little details about him that have come through as he's gotten older. And then you get a book like this where you're following a character that you only somewhat know because he's not really clear about what has happened in his life. You know that he was in the game, and that's kind of it. And there are so many little things that tie together, and it's one of those series where you don't necessarily have to read it one after another to remember all of it. It just kind of is a thing. And everything is so immersive, especially once you've, read this series or watched the movies more than once. You really get to see the world, all the districts, all the stadiums. But I would say even on a first read, even without seeing the movies, it's just such an immersive experience. You really feel like you know these characters, you know their relationships, you know where they are, how the government is running things. Like, I'm reading this and I'm seeing names that I know, or I'm seeing terms that only exist in this world, but I know exactly what they are from the other books, even though I haven't read them in years. And I think it is such a skill to be able to do that. Or even right from the beginning, having a little detail like, oh, I don't really drink, when the Haymitch that we know, he's not quite like that anymore. So it's really cool to see even just a little hint being dropped like that, where it's like, you know how much he as a character is going to change just because of how that one habit is going to shift. And it's obviously like, yeah, he's a kid, he's not at drinking age and all of that, but still, the idea of how much he's going to progress and sort of giving out this thing that is so unlike the person that we know, because in this, he's still a kid. He's not the character that we know at all. I just think it is so well done, and also just how it's calling out the system that they're living in. The thing is, I'm currently reading 1984. I'm over halfway through this book. I've been taking my time with it, and there are a lot of ways that this book is very, very similar, and that's completely, totally intentional. The first quote in this book, sometimes books will have quotes or references to other poems or other stories or whatever to kind of give a vibe. The first quote in this book, the very first page, says a quote from George Orwell. Obviously, there is a huge influence here. Just the way that they talk about how everything they do is being monitored and they have to act the right way because there's going to be consequences if they are seen doing the wrong thing. This isn't even 20 pages into the book, and he's saying, you have to put on the bravest face you can muster because resistance is not an option. And it's just, even the first 20-30 pages of this book are so similar to everything that's in 1984, and I think reading them at the same time creates such an interesting experience because I'm constantly drawing these parallels, which I think it's completely intentional, So I think it's really cool that I just by chance happen to be reading them both at the same time, because it kind of elevates the entire experience of this book, where the government is in control of everything and they're doing things a very certain way and having everything curated so that they look the best, as they get the best outcomes. I love books about how terrible the government is. Can I say that? You can be convinced that you have no power, even though really, if you do put in the work and you put in the years, and sometimes it's not even gonna be in your lifetime. That was something that they talked about in 1984, is how your life as an individual does not matter at all. You are committed to this greater cause that you probably won't ever even see anything come from it. You're putting your life into this idea for the future generations. You are fighting the system so that other people don't have to live under it. Because it's like, this is the 50th games, and we know there's a 75th. Like, we know it keeps going for so long until they finally break it down. But even in this, they don't feel like it's possible to break the system down. Like, this is just the way that things are. This is the way that things have been. This is the way that things will be. But obviously, we do have the context where we know it's gonna change eventually. I'm not gonna say details about this book, but oh my gosh, please read it. If you have ever had any interest in this series at all, if the thought has ever crossed your mind, do it. Such well-written books, such a well-crafted world. And it doesn't even matter if things are predictable, because it's like, obviously he's gonna get chosen for the games. This is the book about his games, but somehow it's still heartbreaking when he gets chosen. And then it's the same thing whenever a character dies in any of these books, where it's like, obviously they're going to the games to kill each other. You know that there can only be one survivor, and yet somehow whenever a character dies, it feels equally as surprising. I'm gonna keep reading. I'm gonna say right now, I did not plan on staying up this late. Right now, it's 2 a.m. and somehow I've only read for 3.5 hours. It feels like I've been reading forever, but I think I started around 7:30 or 8, and then you factor in times for eating and hanging out and whatever. So sure, 3.5 hours. And in that time, I've made it to page 250 of this book, which I would say is pretty good progress. I typically go to bed around 10 or 11 because I wake up for work around 5 or 6. So even the fact that I'm awake at this hour is unheard of. And the only reason that I'm staying up this late is because I am so invested in this book. It has been the longest time since there's been a book that I genuinely want to stay up for. Like, there have definitely been times where I feel like I need to read, where I feel like I have to get more done, so if I can finish a book, I'll feel more accomplished. That's when I'll stay up. But it's been a very, very long time since I've stayed up because I want to know what happens next, you know? I think my only complaint with these later books is just the fact that over half of it is not taking place in the arena, is not taking place during the games, which probably is the case for all of the books, just because you have to have that exposition because you know what's going to happen in the games. There's only so much you can write about during the actual game, so a lot of it is this setup and meeting all the characters and forming alliances and all of that. But when you're physically seeing that and how the story is distributed, it feels as though no matter what happens, the arena is going to be rushed just because it is already so far into the book. And maybe that's the case, maybe it's not. You know, you could argue both ways, because where I'm at right now, I definitely feel like things are just kind of happening. Like with this book and Songbirds and Snakes, it kind of felt like they get to the arena and then stuff just kind of happens, which a lot of that was based more on the history rather than the game itself. So I'm not mad about it, but it does kind of feel like the games are just going by, because at the end of the day, the real significance comes from the connections that are being formed and the plans that are being made and everything like that. But I am for sure having a good time reading it. I'm feeling the childlike whimsy. And as much as I would love to stay up all night and finish this, I just don't know how much more I can get through before I pass out. So this will probably be my last update. I'm gonna read until my eyes are closing, which is not far away. But if I don't finish it tonight, I for sure am gonna finish it early in the morning tomorrow. It just feels really good to be looking forward to something for once. Not reading because it's an obligation, but reading because I want to know what's coming next. That's a feeling that I've been missing. So this is good. I'll talk to you guys in the morning. It's 11 a.m. now. I did finish Sunrise on the Reaping. It took a little over 5 hours to get through, and without saying too much on it, because to be honest, I'm probably gonna make an entire very long video talking about it when the movie comes out, but the thing I will say is this book is very much meant for the people that are fans of the series, which can be both a good and a bad thing. I think it's good because it's cool to see these names that you know come up in the past or in the future or both or whatever. You can see how certain people got to power or how certain people started this rebellion or all of the things that we see progressing through the series. I think it's cool to see how those names come up again and again, or stuff like seeing how the technology and how the mutations evolve over time to where the capital is getting more powerful with what they're able to do and how they're able to manipulate people. But then I think that can also kind of be a bad thing, because at times it feels like it's just forcing every big name into the book just so that you can be like, hey, I know that. And then at a certain point, it just feels like they're doing that with every single character. I do think it works here just because every character is so iconic and because you care so much about them and who they end up being, so it's cool to see where it all started. But it definitely can come on a little bit strong. But I do like the ending of the acknowledgements where she says, "To all my wonderful readers, thanks for once again returning to Panem and investing in the characters and their struggles, even when you know the eventual outcome." And I think that's really important to point out and to be very, very aware of, is obviously when you're going back in time, you know what's going to happen in the future books with this world, with these characters. But even just breaking it down to the individual games, you know there's only going to be one victor, and you probably know who it's going to be just based on what we've read in the other books. So it's not so much how can I make this the most intense, dramatic battle ever, because you already know how the battle is going to end. It's more about the build-up, and it's more about what is this starting? What seeds are being planted here, and how are we going to watch them develop and grow over time in the future books? And since the future books came first, it's really about planting those seeds, showing that character growth right from the start, where they believe one thing, and then they're slowly realizing that there's another option and how they're contributing to it. And I do think it's done very well. This is very much a book that is meant for the fans. There were a couple moments towards the end where I was like, okay, like, I get it, you know, I see what's happening here. I don't know if we really need to be doing all of that, but there was never a point where I was actively against it, which is good. And then for what I'm gonna read next, I'm kind of leaning towards John Green's book, Everything is Tuberculosis, which is nonfiction, and I do think it's going to be a little bit more challenging to read just because of that. This is a lot more information than story-based, so I do think I'll read it in sections, you know. I'm not going to sit down and try to get through this whole thing at once because I want to take the time to take in the information and everything. So I'm thinking I might start with this one just to get a feel for it and to see what the vibe is. And then in between reading that, I will either start The Wedding People or Yellowface. I haven't really decided yet. I'm kind of just going to pick one up and start reading it, and then I'll see which one calls to me. Okay, I'm not that much farther into the reading. I'm still at like 17 hours left, but I need to talk about this book. Because the thing is, when I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, it's nonfiction, it's gonna be difficult to read, so I'm probably only gonna get a couple pages in, and then I'm gonna be so bored and so overwhelmed by statistics or locations or whatever it is, and I'm simply going to have to switch to something easier. And that's just not what happened at all, because I convinced myself that nonfiction is super intimidating, super hard to read, which I think is a lot because of the way that we talk about it online, where a lot of people, when we're posting, say, hey, nonfiction is so hard, so intimidating, I never read it, but I want to read more. It's always, I wish I was reading more of it. And then turning to something like romance or fantasy, which, by the way, a lot of fantasy is pretty directly tied to real life. So if you're reading a book about fantasy, you can probably read nonfiction about a similar topic. Sure, it doesn't have as many fairies in it, but you can probably still understand it pretty well. But the thing is, I've been a fan of John Green for over a decade at this point. I think I was in like 4th grade when I first started reading his books. Like 10-year-old me was sitting on my Kindle reading Looking for Alaska, or reading like literally all of his books. I think I've read them, and I'd do it again. I have no problem rereading those books. I think about them frequently. And with his newer releases being nonfiction, a part of me is like, okay, well, that's scary now. But then you pick it up and you realize it's not actually at all. And it's gonna sound dramatic. I'm gonna say something here. It's gonna sound a little dramatic, but I do think it feels true. And that is, when I read his books, when I read books by John Green, or when I watch him talking in their YouTube videos on any of the channels that they have, it makes me feel like thoughts are worth having. And it's not just John Green, but it is a consistent thing with content from John Green. He's so good at capturing specific feelings. If we're reading Looking for Alaska, Paper Towns, Abundance of Catherines, A Fault in Our Stars, like all of these books capture very specific feelings, and you remember the characters more than anything. They're not all the best written books of all time. There are a lot of people that have a lot of problems with them, but you remember them. They all kind of have some specific feeling that they're trying to capture, or some character that just matters, you know? But the thing is, then you get into his nonfiction work, and the writing style doesn't really change, which means that the information is still really easy to take in. Sometimes I get intimidated by nonfiction specifically because it's so full of numbers, it's so full of statistics or locations or years, and all of those things do exist in this book, but it's not in a way where it feels so impossible, and maybe that's just because it's an author that I'm familiar with, or maybe it's because I underestimate my own abilities to take in information. Because regardless, some books are going to be easier to read than others. That's just how media works. People think differently. They're going to take in information differently. So to just say as a blanket statement that nonfiction is harder to read than fiction, constantly putting ourselves down by saying, man, I wish I could, but it's just so hard, it's so intimidating, like that doesn't make any sense. There are going to be fiction books that are easier or harder to read for every individual, and the same thing can be said for nonfiction. There are some books that I've read where I genuinely enjoyed the information, and I felt better for having learned it, but it took me 6 months to get through a book. Whereas something like this, I only just started today, and I'm already halfway through, which sure, it's a shorter book, it's only 200 pages, but I thought I wouldn't even make it past 10. I thought it would be a challenge to get through this book, not because of the content, but just because it is nonfiction, period. And instead, the complete opposite is true, and I cannot put this down. I tried reading the other books that I said I was going to read, and I couldn't stop thinking about this one. And I think that's the other thing, is it feels so good. It is so rewarding to read books about things that matter, either things that are relevant to the world, things that we need to be mad about, things that relate to your personal life, whatever it is so good to read something that you can understand and have this big collective human moment, you know what I mean? I love to know why things are the way that they are in society, why systems are set up a certain way, why people are perceived better or worse based on specific personality traits or appearance things or anything like that, especially because I literally have a degree focused on media and communication, which is so much focused on things that people have made up. Beauty standards and gender expectations and literally everything about everything is made up. So it feels really good to read about it and to learn anything about why things are the way that they are. Because once you get that information, you think about it every time you see it in real life. For example, in this book, there's a point where he's talking about how tuberculosis has shaped beauty standards because so many people are getting sick with this illness that just happens to make you thinner and makes your cheeks red and your mouth red. And it's like, those are things that we see in beauty now, where it's like the ideal, at least in this part of the world, is that you are thinner and that you wear blush and lipstick, and that's not the beauty standard everywhere, but it's interesting to consider how it's been impacted by this illness that has affected so many people. And he also talks about romanticizing illness in general, whether that be mental, physical, chronic, whatever. How people are so quick to try and control these things that are so out of our control. People are going to get sick, and there's a point in this where he's talking about how animals just, if there's an illness, they don't find a cure. Humans are the only creatures that go and seek out a cure and try to extend life and have this definition of natural death versus other. And it's like, really, every death is natural because you're gonna die. But humans are so set on controlling everything that we have to make it seem like illness is unnatural and it's something that we can cure. But along with that, being ill somehow impacts other areas of your life where it makes you maybe more valuable as a person. There's a whole thing about when you're mentally ill, you're a better creative and that you just have to suffer for your art. That's such a big idea and it's based on nothing. Sometimes you're just mentally ill and that's the end of it. There's such a big idea in society that you have to suffer in order to have a greater impact on the world. For what? I just think it is so well written. It is so well crafted where it's this bigger idea that you could tie into anything. There are so many ways in which this topic is related to everyday life everywhere. And I like that it starts off with more simple things. It starts off with just talking about one person in a specific place, and then it sort of branches out from there. And then throughout the entire book, it's really calling out the healthcare systems for not doing more when they absolutely could. But it's all done in a way to where you can understand the anger and you can understand, learning about all of these different instances and how they all come together and why it's so preventable. But it's like, he's so good at making just memorable moments in books. Like, there are things in this. I read this in August of 2024. I still think about it so frequently. There's another thing that I think of almost every day, I'm gonna be honest, where he's talking about how humans aren't meant to live on this 5-star number system and the whole thing of rating experiences or products or artwork, especially reading a book and then trying to put it on a 1 to 5 scale when every experience is going to be so different. It's going to be so shaped by individual experiences, what type of book you prefer to read, what your lived experience is, how you can relate to it, if there's language you do or don't know. There are so many factors. So how can you possibly fit it into just 5 boxes that somehow encapsulate the entire experience? You just can't. And I have been thinking on that ever since I read this book, because it really puts me off of using platforms that are so reliant on rating systems like that. I would much rather sit and talk about why I care about a book, or why I didn't like a book, what I did and didn't like about it, rather than just putting out a single one rating out into the world as if that means anything. But it's like the big thing that comes from reading these books is you feel like you have power, which is very hard to come by some days. It's very easy to feel like so much of the world is out of your control. There's nothing you can do about any of it, and you kind of just give up. But then you read stuff like this from people who seem to know so much or care so much, people that have the power to talk about things that matter and they actually do it, and then being able to take in that information and think to yourself like, wow, maybe I matter too. There are such big ideas that are in here, but the more you read it, the more you realize other people are thinking similar things to you, and the more you realize there are so many problems in the world, but we do have education that allows us to work towards potentially fixing it in the future. You start to feel like you can do things about the things that need something done, and it just feels really good. It feels really empowering to read information, to take in information from somebody that seems like they actually get it, because throughout these books he also throws in personal experiences where he's talking about his own mental illness and his journey or his family, and it's all of these little personal moments that remind you that yes, he's really good at having information and at presenting it, but he's also just some guy. Anyways, all that to say, I am having a great time reading this book. Obviously, it's not a great topic, but it feels really good to be passionate about a topic. I think I genuinely might just sit and finish this book because I am so into what I'm feeling right now. And also, if you know any other authors that kind of give that same energy as these books, please let me know, because nonfiction shouldn't be scary. I don't want to be scared of it anymore. I want to embrace knowledge with open arms instead of acting like it's something to shy away from because I won't get it. If I want the knowledge, I have access to the knowledge, and that's something that I want to take advantage of. So if you know any authors, any creators that give similar vibes to this, please put it in the comments. I am feeling really good about this. Obviously, it's a little bit later in the night right now. It's like 8:30 p.m. I finished Everything is Tuberculosis later last night. I think I already said what I need to say about that book. I love his writing so much. There's a part in the acknowledgements at the end where he mentions that he's somebody that has a lot of power because of, you know, how much influence he has and how he doesn't want to talk over the voices that need to be heard and everything like that. And it's like, that is what we love to see. So I had a really good time reading that book. I have a lot of respect for John Green and everybody that he talked about and all the work that they're putting in. I think that is so cool. All the things that have improved over time and all of the people that are fighting so hard to make things better. But I woke up this morning, I went to work, I came back, I showered, now I'm in my cozy clothes, and I thought I would pick up something a little bit more fun. I didn't really do this intentionally, but a lot of the books that I am actively looking forward to right now just happen to be new releases. So I kind of just fit that to be the theme of this video because both of those came out this year. And then on my Kindle, I just started Passion Project, which is a book that actually came out today. It's April 8th. This book was released today, and I saw that, and I saw a very brief description when somebody else was saying that they had read it, or that they were wanting to read it, and they described it as being a story in New York. It's a romance, it's about people following their passions. I was like, okay, that's for me. Because one thing you need to know about me is if it's a book set in New York, or it's about any type of creative, I will be reading it. I cannot tell you how many times I have watched the movie Tick, Tick, Boom. I love that vibe so much. It's a silly lifestyle to romanticize, but it feels very special, you know? I can't get over it. So this book, I saw that brief description and I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. But in this, you're following this girl who was in a seemingly long-term relationship, but things didn't really work out, and now she's trying to get back into the dating scene. She doesn't really have a solid job. She's working a lot of small tasks rather than something more permanent. And generally, everything in her life seems like it's on the verge of collapsing. She gets set up to go on this date with a guy, but then she backs out at the last second. She's not ready to do it. It's too much all at once. Of course, they end up crossing paths. And they end up having this conversation where he's like, what do you want to do? in this life? Like, what are you up to? Trying to make small talk, trying to get to know more about her, and she says she doesn't know. She says she doesn't have any passions. And he says, okay, let's do this. Let's every week or every however often, let's meet up and let's just do something different. Let's find something that you're passionate about, because he has this dream that he's working towards. He wants to be a photographer, but then you obviously have to still support yourself, so he's still working as, you know, a more professional job. You gotta do what you gotta do. So he's trying to make money while he also is doing this passion project on the side, but she doesn't really have anything like that. She doesn't have anything that she can escape into. She's been interested in a lot of little things, but she's never really commit to one big thing that she's super into. And this guy's like, okay, let's figure it out. So the entire book is just the two of them in New York doing all of these things, trying to find something that brings her joy. Something that's worth living for, basically. Because right now, everything in her life is pretty hopeless. And from that, I would say this book is everything that I like so far. I like New York, and I like the aesthetic of it all, and she is not the same. She does not like it there. She really wants to leave. She doesn't see the appeal of it. But even in the descriptions of how gross it is, I am still drawn to that place. I want to go back so bad. Don't even talk to me about it. But then you obviously have this more artsy side of things where they're both doing different hobbies, and he is a photographer and he's trying to make his dream work, and you get to see them working hard trying to make enough money to get by, but then also trying to set aside enough time to where they can fully commit to something to actually make it start working for them. And then along the way, they're also, as they're being passionate about these projects, I'm assuming there's going to be some passion between the two of them. And I think after two darker, harder reads, this one is really what I needed. I just want to curl up and escape into a happy little world for a while. So this is going to be my passion project for the next couple of hours, and then we'll come back and pick our next book. Don't know the last time we've spoken, and honestly, it's kind of a good thing. I've been so caught up in reading these books that I haven't even had the time to sit down and talk about them. When I last talked to you guys, I was starting or maybe getting through the Passion Project on my Kindle. I did finish that book. I thought it was really good. For the Passion Project, I really liked, I knew I was gonna like it because I like the New York setting, and I like the idea of finding something that you're passionate about, especially in that setting. Like, romanticizing that whole environment is just, it's a good vibe. It sucks to live it, kind of, but it's fun to read about, it's fun to watch. But usually the romances that I like are the ones that are not super jokey and they're not super spicy. They're more focused on real life interactions and relationships, not just with the romance, but with their families. So like another favorite romance that I have is Love in Other Words, which is very heavy on the grief that the main character feels about her parent. And I think that's part of why I love the book so much, is because you have to contrast this romance with the relationship that they have with their parents, and then how everybody all together is dealing with that and those feelings. Because on top of going through complicated ups and downs with this other person, you also have to see how did they deal with the bad feelings that you have about maybe your parent passing away or going away or whatever it is. And this book also touches on mental illness, which another book that I really liked that was a romance is The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. It was very much a lighthearted, funny rom-com, but the more serious element came from their mental health and dealing with that. And I think that's really what brought the book together, is this contrast between the more serious, harder parts of life and then finding somebody that can lift you up, but without making it seem like they have an obligation to do that, without seeming like they are the only thing that can do that. They're just one pillar of support. I think there was just enough humor in the book to balance out the harder parts of it, and I do think it was frustrating at points, but it's entirely intentional because it's highlighting the character's mental illness and how she can go in these circles of self-destruction even though that's maybe not what she wants for her life, but it just seems like the only option. And one other thing I will say I really like is that her previous boyfriend is never depicted as this bad, evil guy that she has to face the trauma with him or anything like that. It's not about him being a bad person, it's just he's not there anymore, and she's grieving just the loss of this person rather than coming to terms with the fact that he's not as good as she thought or something like that. It's not so much focused on this previous boyfriend is evil, but this next boyfriend is perfect. It's just kind of people. And it is genuinely motivating. It's showing these characters and their hardships, and it's talking about how things feel hopeless, or saying, I don't have any passions and I have no desire to get any because it's just not who I am. Or I don't want to do this and this because I'll look a certain way, and all of these different things that come up throughout life that are such common thoughts for a lot of people, but it does kind of motivates you, and it presents solutions without feeling forced or without feeling too cheesy. But it's like, I put that book down and I'm thinking about my own life, and it's like, okay, why don't I approach situations like this? They're pushing their boundaries and finding these new passions to see what they're interested in, and it's like, okay, well, why don't I live every day like this and push my own boundaries a little bit every day, because really, you only get the one life. You might as well go out of your comfort zone and just do things for the sake of doing them, because otherwise you might never get the chance. And then I don't think I talked about this book at all. I started and finished Yellowface since we've last spoken. I bought this at the same time that I got the Hunger Games and the John Green book, and I immediately started reading it. Got like 10 pages in, set it down, read all of these, but in the back of my head I was still thinking about this book, because in this you're following a white author who takes on the name of this Asian author that she has been friends with, who has recently passed away, and she tries to pass off that author's work as her own. And the whole idea of this book is that you're reading from the perspective of somebody that's not so great. She's not meant to be likable. In fact, she's very evil. She's actively stealing this work, passing it off as her own, and then slowly changing aspects of her life, and like more specifically her public appearance, in order to seem more diverse, in order to seem more interesting. And you just watch her through the years as she's following this decision, where it starts off as just a minor thing of inspiration, and then it goes and it kind of ruins her whole life. And what I will say about this book is it is enraging in the best way. It is calling out things that are very, very real. The type of person that this main character is, and the types of people that are in this book are all very real people. And I normally don't like when social media is brought into books because I feel like it dates them. I say that all the time, but I think it works really well in this because this book is trying to call out a very specific time period. It's talking about present day, how the world is, how social media can influence the careers of people and so quickly go one way or the other. And it's talking about the idea of who can or can't tell certain stories. This whole idea of cancel culture, when is it justified, when is it not? Like, this book is very relevant, and normally I would dislike it, but it was done in a way to where I really genuinely could not stop. Again, we have another book where I just couldn't put it down. I just wanted to keep reading it all in one sitting. I think this book is very easy to read. It's very easy to get through. Obviously, the subject material can get a little bit difficult, but the actual book itself isn't hard to read. It's just so frustrating because the entire time the main character is trying to justify to herself why it's okay that she made this decision to publish the book under her own name, to not give credit to the person that did a lot of the work for it, etc., etc. And the thing is, she comes to the conclusion that the story wouldn't have gotten told if it weren't for her, and that's something that's repeated a couple times. Rather than using their platforms and their voices to lift up stories that aren't told, they think it's better that it's told from them. And I think that's interesting after reading something like John Green's book, where he so clearly stated that he has this big platform and he wants to make sure that he's using it to lift up voices that aren't being heard. So to then pivot to this, which is so directly calling out the people who don't do that. And like, she tries to argue that by rewriting certain parts of the story or by publishing it a certain way, she's making it more accessible because the original version was too hard to understand. And it's like, some stories are not going to be easy to understand, especially if you have not lived the experiences that are in them. The whole point is so that people that are part of those communities can read something that they can relate to, and if you are interested in that, then you can put in a little bit more work to understand experiences other than your own. But when people try to make things accessible by just taking out the parts that they can't relate to, all you're doing is silencing those voices and those experiences. There were multiple times where I was physically cringing at the things that this character was doing. But again, it's entirely intentional. The author wants you to feel this way. The main character And really, all of the characters, they're not good people. They're not supposed to be good people. I will say I kind of fell off at the ending. I wasn't as interested in how it all wrapped up, but for the most part, I really had a good time reading this book. I think it is exactly what it wanted to be. So I finished this book this morning, and then I sat for another 2 hours because I started Our Infinite Fates. Usually this book has this blue cover, and I thought for sure that's what I was going to be getting, but then I was at work and Kaylin shows up with this special edition of it. And first of all, I just think these colors in general are gorgeous, but then the pages... Are we kidding? And then you take that off, and the inside, this is such a gorgeous edition of a book. Normally, I try to stay away from the special edition books just because Barnes & Noble has been going a little wild with them, but to receive this rather than buying it on my own, I am so excited. I gasped out loud when I saw it because I think this is just such a gorgeous edition of a book. This is another new release, and the reason I got it is because it's described as being similar to Addie LaRue, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and then The Time War. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue meets This Is How You Lose the Time War. It's similar to Addie LaRue where you're following these people throughout time where they are just kind of immortal, but then not like Addie LaRue, because in that one she was pretty much completely alone for a very long time. In this one, you're following a pair that are fated to be together, but also not. In every single lifetime, this duo comes together, but they're destined to die before they turn 18, and the main character doesn't really know why that's the case. So you're jumping back and forth between present day and then other lifetimes that they've had where you're following just everything that's gone on between the two of them, the ups and the downs and the very downs. And in one sitting, I got 148 pages through this, so I'm feeling really good about this one as well. I definitely don't think it's going to be as highly ranked as the other books that I've been reading just because it's a little bit shorter and it also feels a little bit less elevated. I can't think of what other word I would use to say that. But so far, I really like the idea of it. I really like the pacing of it. I like how we're jumping between the different timelines and how things are getting introduced. Usually I find myself dragging through these challenges and feeling like they never end, but I actually don't want this challenge to end. I want an excuse to keep on reading. So I'm gonna go make some more progress on this. It's been a couple days. I finished the books for this video, 24 hours of reading, and I'm proud to announce that I finished 6 books in that time, which I do think makes sense because that's about 4 hours of reading per book, and if they're around 300 pages, that makes sense to me. And also, I will say all 6 of these books were winners. I wanted to read all of them, which is really why I made this video in the first place. Not necessarily because I felt like I had to get through these books or I had to reach the time limit, but because I was so excited to read that I knew I was gonna fly through the hours. We didn't really talk about either of these books in detail, but I finished both of them. Our Infinite Fates definitely has a lot of similarities to Addie LaRue. It takes the whole idea of like we'll be together in every life and pushes it a little farther because you're following this pair that's kind of fated to be together, but every 18 years they end up both dying, and you don't know why they're drawn together, you don't know why they have to die, but you're jumping between time periods as you're watching this relationship grow over 1,000 years of doing this. If there's one thing I wish I could have seen from this book, it's the first time that she kills him, because I don't know that that is in this book. And I was thinking about that throughout the whole thing. I was like, at what point did they realize that it doesn't have to be one person always doing it to the other? And I really do like the twist towards the end of this book that explains the why. I was not prepared for that at all. I was not expecting it. The ending does go by really, really fast, but I do think it's kind of cool to shift the world to become what it is. But overall, the pacing was really good. I think the only thing that would make me like it more is if it's a little longer and we got to see more of their other lives. But at that point, I don't even know if you could find a good stopping place to end one story and move to the next, because there's so much to unpack with each of the worlds that they've lived in, so maybe it's for the best that it stays how it is. And then the last book that I read is The Wedding People, which looking at this, I originally thought was a romance, but it's not really. This book is a lot darker than I was expecting, so I would definitely say if you're going to go into this, check the content warnings, but it was a Book of the Year finalist for Book of the Month, so it was very, very popular with a lot of readers. The whole idea is this lady randomly shows up to a hotel that's completely booked out for this wedding party, and she's the only one that isn't a part of it. She's feeling kind of lost and hopeless in her own life, but then she randomly joins this group of people that are seemingly having a great week. So it's going into this whole idea of finding yourself and not being afraid to be honest and to be true to yourself, because she's with this group of strangers in this place that she's not familiar with, so she doesn't really feel the restrictions of, like, I have to fit a certain way because people see me that way. She's not afraid to be open and honest with the people around her because there's really no consequence. They don't know her to begin with. And this really reminds me of The Passion Project, but maybe if it was more depressed. I feel like that is kind of the vibe that I'm getting. There's a lot more to do with parents and complex family relationships, which, as you know, I love. It's pretty straightforward in darker topics and looking at the idea of not having anything that you're actively living for or working towards or anything like that. And maybe it's just because it's another book that's quoting Virginia Woolf. If you know, All the Right Places is like one of my favorite books from high school. So anytime I see a book that talks about Virginia Woolf, I kind of have a little part of me that has to love it. My one complaint is that you're following this whole group of people in the hotel, all of the family of the bride and the groom, and it's a little bit confusing at times to follow everybody and how they're related. I found it a little bit difficult to follow individual relationships and how they interact, which, you know, I'm not sure how you could resolve that, but I also think it could actually be kind of intentional, where it's like you're the main character who's being thrown into this group of people that all have a whole life together and you're just completely unaware of who they are. Obviously, she gets to know them over time and she becomes more comfortable with the group as the story goes on, but in the beginning, she doesn't know them, she's just thrown into the situation. So you could argue that as the reader, you're feeling similar things to what she's experiencing, because I don't know these people, she doesn't know these people, and here they are talking about their lives as if it's common sense. That's the only way that I could try and justify that to be something impactful, but honestly it was just kind of difficult, especially there's a scene where they're all on a boat and all talking together and I was just not following it in the slightest. And I think this book is impactful in a lot of ways, and I probably would have liked it a lot more had I not been so tired while reading it, because there were a lot of points where something emotional had happened or some profound line was just written onto the page, and if I was a little more awake, if I was a little more emotionally connected, I probably would have gone through and tabbed the book and had all these markings in it and all of these examples to share. But to be honest, this is no fault of the book. I was just tired while I was reading this. It's been a long week, and despite that, I still wanted to keep reading, which is why I feel so good. Sure, I was tired, sure, I was forcing my eyes to stay open so that I could read another page, but at the end of the day, isn't that what we're here for? To be so excited about reading that you just can't put the book down, even when you sometimes really need to. There is a little bit of a romance, but I'm happy that it's not a traditional romance. I'm happy it didn't take that direction, because really this is a book about self-discovery and finding who you really want to be, being more honest with yourself and just living life to the fullest regardless of what other people think of you, which is why I kind of compared it to The Passion Project, and it's also why I feel so good after reading it, because both of those books are really big on being yourself, being authentic regardless of anybody else, because you only get this one chance. So you have to just do the things that are important to you specifically rather than living for other people. And they both really get on that idea of don't be embarrassed or don't be ashamed. You don't have to feel awkward, because at the end of the day, you're just doing what you do. And I think those are the kinds of messages that I needed to see right now, just because I'm trying to push myself in a lot of ways. I'm trying to be more friendly and more social, and sometimes it feels really hard. It feels like that's just not who I am. But it's not who I am because it's not who I have been. that doesn't mean I can never be that. And that's kind of the idea that those books are pushing. And that concludes my week of reading. I don't, off the top of my head, know how many pages or how long I spent on each book. I'll put the time splits on the screen if I feel like going through and finding all of that. But I'm genuinely really happy because I wouldn't put any of these below 4 stars. I genuinely enjoyed reading all of these so much. I wanted to pick up all of them. There was not a point for any of these books where I felt like, man, I really wish I could put it down right now. I really wish I wasn't reading this right now. It was always, man, I wish I could go and read more of my book, but I have to go to bed. Man, I wish I could have woken up a little bit earlier so that I could have read a couple more pages. I'm so excited for the shift to be over so that I can come home and read more of my book. Or I don't want to scroll mindlessly on my phone or computer right now because I get to read more of this book. So why would I be doing that when I could be doing this, which I genuinely find joy from doing, rather than just feeling like I'm watching other people live their lives while I sit there doing nothing. It feels good to be excited about reading. It has felt like such a chore recently where I feel like I have to read my physical TBR because I have to get these books away so that I can prioritize other things in my life. And it's like, okay, but why am I clearing that? And the reason is because I find joy from reading, but not when I'm forcing myself to do it. I find joy from reading when I want to read. So if I'm in the mood to read, let's honor that, you know? And then while I've been doing that, I've also been accessorizing a little bit more. I've been doing my hair a little bit more. I just have had a really great week, honestly. And I'm so glad that you have come along with me. But now it is time that we part ways. So if you've read any of these books, let me know what you think on them. Or if there are any new releases that are coming out and you're excited about them, let me know, because I have been a little bit out of the book loop, but I'm curious because I've heard that in the next couple of months there are a lot of things to be excited for. If you like my face and you want to see more of it, you can subscribe to this channel or my music channel, Riverbend. You can also follow my socials, which I always have linked in the description. And that's all I got for you today. So I will see you hopefully very soon with another video. Bye!